When baking in XNormal, these ray distance values, they really depend on how you built your model and their scale. Unfortunately, there is no magic number that will work in all situations, so there is a bit of trial and error involved. My usual strategy is to first do a test bake with low quality settings and with whatever values happen to be there. And then I start to put in some number changes to see what the differences are. And whether or not the problem starts to go away, it should at least give me a clue as to whether I need to go higher or lower with these numbers. I then jump to a large number difference just to see if the bake looks better or not, and then I bring things back from there. I usually find that this works better than making small changes and gradually inching towards a better result. So trying to find the extremes and then a balance from there. If you have problems finding values that work for you, then you might want to consider using the Ray Distance Calculator tool found in the Tools tab here. Now, the way this works is it'll show your low poly mesh here. All you have to do is press go, and then you can see that it loads the meshes and then starts to calculate. And once these numbers start to stabilize, usually it doesn't take too long. In this case, I'm just going to wait for 10 seconds here. I press stop, and then press copy results. Values copied. And close this window. And if I go back to low definition meshes, you see that it has inputted those numbers for me in here. Now, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. There have been times where it really has helped, and especially if I was totally barking up the wrong tree. Say I was putting in some really small numbers, and in fact I really needed to put in some really big numbers, or vice versa. In that case, it can really at least get you in the ballpark range. But there have been other cases where the numbers that it gives me aren't even close to what I need. So, just give it a shot. If it helps, then it helps. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. If you continue to have problems, then double check and make sure that your high and low res meshes are actually the right scale in relation to each other. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but you never know. So you should bring both meshes into something like Maya, or you could even check it in the 3D viewer that is built into XNormal here, and just double check and make sure they're occupying the same space. As I mentioned before, there will be times when you won't be able to get a perfect bake simply by adjusting those ray distance values. Sometimes you need manual control over how it bakes, and usually this is done through what is known as a cage. Now, the cage itself is basically a duplicate of your low poly mesh, with the vertices adjusted specifically for baking. This is in contrast to the normal envelope, which it just kind of globally changes size. Let me go ahead and launch this this viewer here. If I drag this over here, so this is let me try to maximize this. Okay. Now, let me turn off my highlighter. Okay. So this is the XNormal's 3D viewer, and you can see that I have the high poly mesh and the low poly mesh in there. Navigating around here is a little bit different from some 3D programs. It's more like an FPS shooter, so you use the WASD keys to move around and hold down right mouse button to change the camera rotation. What might happen occasionally is you might not see anything. Sometimes it looks just all black, and in that case I would recommend turning on draw stars, and let's see, or draw grid. Yeah, okay. I don't know why stars aren't working for me right now, but yeah, you just draw a grid just to get yourself some frame of reference for where your model might be, because sometimes it won't be right in front of the camera to begin with. Depending on the scale of your scene, you might need to change this number here, the advanced sensibility. This just kind of speeds up your camera, and some of these other things you could play around with too. So anyway, back to cages. If you click on this show cage, you can see what XNormal is using for doing the ray casting. And sometimes if you can't get a good bake from just adjusting those ray distance values, you might need to adjust this manually, this cage here. And to do that, you just click on edit cage, and you get a bunch of options here. And you can see what the ray distance values does is this cage global extrusion. This is kind of what it's doing, and sometimes that's enough, but in other cases it's not. So what you might want to do is go point by point, and to do that, just middle mouse click on a point, and you can see that this is highlighted, and then you can change the selection extrusion, and you can see it's moving. You could also change it, move it in X, Y, and Z here. And you just adjust it until the cage encapsulates the high-res mesh. And then what you do is save the meshes here on the button on the top right here. And what that'll do is it will save all your meshes out to a .sbm file, which is something that XNormal will use. And then if you go back into XNormal later, actually let's go back there now, then you'll see that it'll have replaced your meshes. Well, it won't have replaced, it will add SBM meshes underneath, and we'll have that checked and ready to render. If you have your own cage, what you can do is just say use cage, and then go to external cage file and make sure to not add meshes but browse external cage file, and then you can load your own cage and it will use that for rendering. So let's talk about cages in Maya. If you remember what we were doing before with the envelopes, that's kind of like Maya's cage, and what you can do is you can edit it. If you say oh yeah, okay, envelope, this model's envelope, what you can do is select it and modify the vertices yourself. In this case, I have already done that here, just to show the difference between how it can help improve your renders. For this first example, on this side, I set the search envelope to a very small amount, 0.1%. Well, for 0.1% for both of these. A small number that I knew would give me errors, and you can see that there are some errors here. There's some, I mean, if you didn't know what you're looking for, then you might not have noticed that as an error, but if you brought in, let's say, your high poly model to compare with, then you can see that obviously there's a difference in what's happening and how the skulls are, the transition between the skull and the rest of the object isn't quite working out. You can also see in inside the eye sockets, there's some mistakes going on. Anyway, let's hide the high res. So the difference between these two models right here is that on this one I actually edited the cage, and the way I edited it was very simple. All I did was selected these vertices on this side, and then I just transform them along their normals, like that, which is kind of like what increasing the search envelope does. And that was just to show, so in other words, I didn't change the envelope on this side, and you can see if you compare these models here, you can see they have the same mistakes going on. Especially here, you can see what's happening with the skull. There's some artifacts there that didn't get corrected because this side didn't have the envelope changed. However, this one did, and you can see the improvements in the render, or in the bake, sorry. So anyway, what you can do is, since I have this envelope done, and if you like the result, what you can do is actually export this as your cage to use in whatever other program, such as XNormal, if you wanted to use a cage for that. Now the thing about editing cages is that you can only move the vertices around, more or less, because what the program needs is to have the same vertex order between the cage and your low polygon mesh. And what vertex order means is basically every time you save or export your model, what it'll do is it'll assign a number to every vertice. But the thing is, if you do something like you add edges, or you add a split, or you extrude, or remove, you delete some edges, well, not just edges, but some vertices, then what will happen is that ordering gets totally screwed up, and it will invalidate it as a cage. So you just want to be careful about that. Stick to moving things around only. Just move the vertices around. And preferably, I think the results, you might get better results if you try sticking to moving the vertice along its normal, rather than kind of arbitrarily moving it. I mean, sometimes it's a necessity to do that, but just be careful how you move things around. You could get some odd results. But yeah, those are cages, and it's something that I honestly try not to rely on if I can get away with it, because I'm a little bit reluctant to introduce yet another mesh to the pipeline that can be lost or become out of sync with other files. Like let's say I work on this and I create a cage, but for some reason I don't share it, or I don't save it with the file. So then let's say another artist needs to work on this a little bit later, and they don't know that cage exists. So they might make their own cage, and it might produce different results than yours, or any number of problems that can come up. Like let's say they updated the high-res mesh, and then you need to go back and make a change, but your cage no longer works with the altered high-res mesh. So there's a lot of situations where things can get out of sync. I mean, that's probably not that big of a deal. Obviously getting the best bake result possible is the #1 priority, but again, if I can get away with not using them, then I'll try to do that, and I'll just try to use just bumping up the search envelope or the ray distance values. Try that first, and then if push comes to shove, then I'll try out a cage.